Hey guys, I'm Zed.
And I'm Z.
So, deck tech.
Yeah, so I've been saying I want to start doing the deck techs for the commander decks that come out with these sets. I know we're a little bit late on the Midnight Hunt. Unfortunately, life circumstances have not been very permitting for us. This is our second time getting together and actually being able to film since the release of the set. So it's been pretty hectic. And last time we only had a short period of time to film, so we just didn't have enough time to get everything together. That said, we're hoping to remedy that today. I've got both pre-cons, and we'll kind of be releasing these out as a series. I don't know if we're going to make them on the same week or if we're going to do them, kind of how we're going to do that yet. But we've got a plan. We will discuss it afterwards. But that'll give us a couple ideas. And one thing we wanted to bring to your attention, we're looking at possible ways to do these deck techs going forward. Previously, we've always been using the cards available to us in our personal collections. With us being relatively... I came back to the game at the start around the time that Ikoria came back through. And Zed, you got back in what time? Probably Commander Legends a little bit? Or
yeah.
So that should tell you our collections are not going to be the most extensive.
No.
So in certain aspects, there are other decks we want to bring you, but we just don't have those cards on hand. In those instances, did you want us to go ahead and just discuss the decks with a deck list and us do cards pop up on the screen? Or do you like the way we're doing the deck techs now? Overall, we still want to handle them in such a way where we isolate what they are, what categories we're building off of, and working from there. But we wanted to leave it to you so that we would kind of figure out what we're looking at.
And as always, guys, we want to make content that you guys want to see. So, if you can, go down below, let us know. And if you guys have some ideas for videos, with Magic, 40K, anything.
Because we're mostly trying to hit the tabletop stuff here on the channel. That's kind of why we've got some Pokemon stuff in the works, especially with the new games coming out.
It's right there.
Yeah, a little behind the scenes. But we're looking at World War III and those associated games.
I just got my tanks today.
Yeah. Star Wars Legion, we've got those models set aside. We're looking at that. So we've got a couple of ideas of other tabletop games we're wanting to at least discuss. But we kind of want to hear from you, especially with these commander decks. It's one of those, it's not hard for us to get the decks together or come up with the ideas, but we want to figure out the best way to present them to you. And so, do you want a hybrid approach where we do a little bit of each? Do you want us to just play with what we've got and show you what we have available? Or did you want us to go ahead and go, hey, go hog wild, whatever cards are appropriate, put them in the video, go from there. That way we kind of make sure we're going off of what y'all want to see.
I mean, I'm good either way. If we're running off of the cards we have, it's easier on my end for editing. Otherwise, it's a little harder. So if you guys want to see me suffer having to edit it,
and for the most part, we'll try to keep it simple. It'll still be plug and play. So if I'm talking about removal spells in a category, it would be one of those. We'd be having a discussion like this, and we just pop them up along the screen as we discuss them.
Right here?
Right there, or we might even do them along the bottom if we're talking multiple at the same time. So,
I just might cover his face with magic cards.
If I tend to irk him, yeah. So just let us know in the comments below, and we'll have this disclaimer on both of the Innistrad commander decks, so that way on a couple of our products going forward, or our content here, you'll be able to see.
It's product.
I'm having a day.
We are making product here, guys, because you are the consumer, and you are consuming our product. There you go.
All right.
Let's get into the deck tech. All right, guys.
So we're working with Lenore, the Autumn Sovereign. So this is the Coven counters deck, but we modified it a little bit. And a lot of this I decided I want cards from the set. I want to make it based on humans as the theme. So I removed a lot of the counter matters or some of these other effects. And so this is just the start of our human base. But what that's giving us here is a lot of good value mana creatures, or they're giving us abilities like when it enters the battlefield, create a token, and things of that nature. So kind of working our way down.
So we're pro-human.
Basically, this is going to be the human deck. That's what it cares about. That's what we built around.
Sorry, guys. There's got to be like 3 dad jokes in every video.
So in this case, her ability is going to state on a 0/4 body, Coven, at the beginning of combat on your turn, put a 1/1 counter on up to 1 target creature you control. Then, if you control 3 or more creatures with different powers, draw a card. So, it's a draw spell in the command zone. It's not as good as some of our other value-based engines in the command zone that exist in the format, but it's something subtle. It's not going to draw you a lot of heat in comparison to some of the more well-known ones.
So, you get her ability when she's in the command zone and on the field?
No. It's only when she's in play.
Okay.
But it's one of those, when you can see that that's the opposing commander, you can see that they're not going to be drawing cards as fast as someone like a Tulane deck, which says when a creature enters the battlefield, draw, or when you cast a creature.
Okay.
Type effects. And so kind of just going down the list, we've got Gavin Taungard, or Taungard, which is one of the new cards from Innistrad Midnight Hunt. It's going to make it day as it enters the battlefield if it's not day or night. And then when day becomes night or night becomes day, look at the top 4 cards of your library. You may reveal a creature card with its converted mana cost 3 or less from among them, and put it into your hand. The rest go on the bottom of your library in any order. So it's a kind of cantrip filter card draw effect.
Ooh, I like that one.
So it's a way to get more cards in hand, and notably it's 3 power. Notice we did not pay as much attention to that, but we do actually have a pretty good balance of 1, 2, 3, and then counters to kind of modify and adjust those as needed.
Always pay attention to the mana of your deck.
Well, in this case, we're also not really looking at that as much because the Coven ability is based on power. So we also want to make sure we have differing powers here. And so that was kind of something we looked at, trying to maximize as best we could, with those being our sweet spots. Keeping on this side of the table here, we have Maya Bredegard Protector, which was from Kaldheim. Other creatures you control get +1/+1, which is a pretty good global buff. Though, be careful with your Coven. Again, it can throw off the math if you're not paying attention. It's just one of those we do want to, when we eventually set up to go wide and try to win out the game, we want to buff. The other nice thing it does for us, though, is whenever a land enters the battlefield under our control, we get to create a 1/1 human warrior token. So, notably, the fact it's a human is why it's here. It's a good, over long-term game, grab you a couple of creatures for defense, or
nice.
a couple of creatures for aggressive swing outs. And it's meant to be a value piece in the deck. Kind of moving along to our next card, that's going to be Eternal Witness. Most people who've played the format enough know being able to regrow something from the graveyard to your hand is pretty good. Having that attached to a human, it seems like a no-brainer. On top of that, it's going to be another one of those cards that sit in the 2 spot when it comes to powering the deck. We've got Absinthe's Pilgrim here, which is just a humble mana dork. Came out in original Innistrad. It's going to be a 1 mana, 1/1, tap, add a white mana to your mana pool. Ramp is pretty important in Commander. So having an ability to do that on a 1-drop in your tribe is pretty good. Ask all the green players playing Land of War Elves in their Commander decks. They can tell you all about that. White has had a pretty long history here of not being good at drawing cards. So we kind of have a little bit of a package here between the next 2 where we're setting up to combat that a little bit. So we have Mentor the Meek, which is when another creature with power 2 or less enters the battlefield under our control. We can pay a mana, and if we do, draw a card. That does play favorably with some of our synergies here in the deck between our token creators and our low-powered creatures. for the most part, the way the deck was constructed, we're actually going to mostly be playing around 1, 2, and 3 powered creatures. There are some other buff effects in the deck, but for the most part, they're going to sit pretty low, so that allows us to get these to go off. The next card we're looking at is the Esper Sentinel from the Modern Horizons 2 set. So it's a pretty new card.
I like that guy.
Yeah, it's Ristic Buddy. But basically, whenever an opponent casts their first non-creature spell each turn, you'll draw a card unless that card's control caster pays X, where X is the Sentinel's power. Comes in as a 1/1 for 1. So that blue player decides, I'm going to play a bunch of cantrips. You're going to at least get 1 card for their endeavor if they're not willing to pay the toll. Kind of moving along to the next card, we have Ambitious Farmhands, which is going to enter the battlefield. It's going to find you a basic plains, and it's going to put it in your hand. But if something happens and you transform it with its coven ability here, then it's going to flip over and become... I should have had another copy of this available. Just a simple 3/3 lifelinker.
Lifelink!
But it's another way we can modify our powers on the fly. So if we needed to, it gives us a way to go, oh, well, I've already got a 1/1 power. I need a 3. If we've got that, we can kind of try to make that happen. Set us up for future turns. Next, we'll kind of work our way from the bottom to the top here on the right. We've got Yavi Maya Elder. Another old school commander card. A lot of people have always liked this. When it dies, you can search your deck for up to 2 basic lands, reveal them, and put them into your hand. Well, how are you going to get it to die, you may ask? Well, for 2 mana and sacrificing it, you can choose to draw a card. So it's going to be 3 mana put in play, 2 mana, sacrifice it, draw, and go ahead and get 2 lands. Another new card I'm pretty excited about from the Commander Precon was the Moorland Rescuer. When it dies, you'll get to return any number of creature cards with a total power of X or less from the graveyard to the battlefield. And it puts them into play into the battlefield, so that's pretty nice.
Ooh, nice.
Now, the flip side is it's based on the Moorland Rescuer's power, which, again, we have a bunch of ways to modify that here in the deck. It starts off with 4 power, and when you use that, it's going to exile itself. So you're not going to just be able to keep playing the shenanigan over and over again.
We like to play the shenanigan over and over and over.
Yeah, but Wizards kind of knows we're not allowed to do that, so they've said no. In this case, we've got Knight of the White Orchid is the last card on our bottom row here. When it enters the battlefield, if an opponent controls more lands than you, go find a plains from your library and put it onto the battlefield, then shuffle. Doesn't say basic plains, doesn't say, put it in your hand. It's pretty direct. It wants you to kind of catch up. It's that white idea. It's the white colors idea of catch-up ramp, where you're already running behind the opponents, mostly green players, so go ahead and try to get back in the game. Moving on to a couple more of our value cards here in the humans. We've got Summerwald Sage. Tap, add 3 mana of any one color, but you can only use it for creatures. We're running a pretty heavy density of creatures because we're using our creatures for a lot of the removal effects, a lot of draw and other kind of interactive effects that a lot of the time we would go to a spell like an instant or sorcery for. So that's going to kind of help us out here with trying to ramp a little bit harder. The next card we have is Cathar Commando here. One of the cards I was super excited about in the set. So 2 mana, 3/1 flash. For 1 mana, sack it, you can destroy an artifact or enchantment. So it's a disenchant on your creature there that has a 3 power. So it's really, really hard to favorably block a lot of the time, because when you would want to throw, I'll just throw my 4/3 at it or whatever, it's going to trade that 4/3. So it makes your opponent think about combat just a little bit more.
And the blue player can't just... No, I just can't spell your disenchant.
Yeah, they actually have to use a trick bind, a stifle, something to shut down the ability. So it's a good way to get in when the blue player's defenses are down.
Yeah, I was talking with our local game shop owner, and he mentioned that a lot of times these cards will be on the table, and you'll forget that they're there.
They're an onboard combat trick that you can pop and go, hey, it's been public knowledge. It's been sitting on the table. it's one of those at any time. That's why you just want to make sure you're careful about what's going on and ask questions if you need. Hey, what's that card over there? What does it do? Because you don't want to get blown out in a gotcha moment.
Yeah, this happened to me many of times.
The next card we got here is the Auger of Autumn, and that's going to let you look at the top of your library from at any time and let you play lands from the top of your deck. So having that power, it can kind of let you get those lands off the top so you can draw into more impactful or more meaningful cards, such as more creatures, removal spells, things of that nature. It lets you basically play the game a little bit smoother. But it also has a coven ability. As long as you control 3 or more creatures with different powers, coven, you may cast creature spells from the top of your library as well. So it's a way where you can get additional value from there, like having an extra card in your hand. And if you cast that card, you get to draw another extra card. It just kind of keeps the train going, and we like this. The next one we're looking at here is going to be the Herringblade Elite. It's a 1/1 Vigilance for 3. Whenever another human enters the battlefield under your control, you'll put a 1/1 counter on it. And then it can tap, add X mana of 1 color, where X is its power. So in this deck, we're going to have a bunch of humans entering the battlefield, which means a bunch of counters, which means this thing is going to hopefully, in theory, generate us a bunch of mana, which we can then use to play more humans and get more counters and keep the train going until
shenanigans.
Basically, we're going to want to overwhelm the board state. And then our last card here in the value slot. And ultimately, there are a lot of humans in this deck, so we're going to have a couple of categories of humans, but we'll count these as the value humans. That's going to be Catilda, Dawnheart Prime. She's a human warlock from the actual set itself. 2 mana, 1/1, protection from werewolves. So anyone running Tolvar, this is a card to be on the lookout for. They've got your number. But it also says human creatures you control have tap, add 1 mana of any mana of that creature's color. So basically, if you have a red-white human, you can tap it for a red or a white. But all your humans will get this. So it turns your Mentor the Meek from a draw spell to a ramp spell and a draw spell. Things like that. So it's really there to kind of get you more value. But in the long run, in the long game, if you're needing to kind of grind out that value, it's got an ability 6 mana for 4, a white, a green, tap, put a 1/1 counter on each creature you control. In case you can't tell, that's kind of a sub-theme of the deck, is the 1/1 counters. And we built a little bit with that in mind. Realistically, if we were going to build the counters as the primary focus, though, we would go with the alternative commander, which we'll cover in just a moment. The problem is, I'm concerned that that commander will draw a lot of heat, especially for a new deck or new players, because it can get out of control just a little bit quickly. And so I wanted to give you the lower, grindier value deck that people, I think, are going to be less inclined to immediately put the target on your back.
Yeah, because overall, guys, we want you to have fun with the decks that we're helping you learn to build or showing you how we build them.
And this is not the final version of this deck by any stretch of the imagination. It's just, when I sit down and I look to modify the pre-con, this is how I'm looking to modify it. In this case, I removed a bunch of the 1/1 counter synergies because that's not the playstyle I like to play. Instead, I went real all in on the humans because I like the idea of it. I think of Innistrad and I think of like the Coven mechanic, and the first thing I thought of was the new Sigarda. Spoiler alert, she's in here. And so I kind of wanted to focus around that ability and that idea of the humans kind of rallying together with the old magics to fend off the other evils of the plane. So that's why we've got this, group of knights and shamans and warriors and dryads or druids and everything else. So we're going to cut here, and you'll see our next section here in just a moment.
Alright, guys, so more humans?
Yeah, more humans. We're on the next section. In this case, these are going to be our 1/1 counter synergies with the humans. When I was mentioning the other commander of this pre-con, I was referring to Kyler, Sigardan Emissary. He's the 5 mana 2/2. which you think, why is that going to get you some heat? We'll get there. He's a human cleric. Whenever another human enters the battlefield under your control, you put a 1/1 counter on Kyler, Sigard, and Emissary. Other humans you control get +1/+1 for each counter on Kyler. So he's getting big, your humans are getting big, and when humans come into play, he gets bigger. So ultimately, that's going to be the big scary thing, is he makes your army really big really quick.
So if he has 3 counters on him, and we play this card, which is a 1/1, it becomes a 4/4?
So, because it's a human, it would enter the battlefield, giving him another trigger. If he's already got the 3 on it, he'll get a 4th counter, which means he becomes a, in this case...
6/6.
He is a 6/6, and he grants that thing +4/+4.
So that would, without his abilities, would make this a 5/5. Wow, okay.
Yeah, so it synergizes really nicely with a bunch of the other counter shenanigans. And we'll see some of that later as well. The next card, though, we have to kind of go with Kyler is Thalia's Lieutenant. And when it enters the battlefield, you'll put a 1/1 counter on each other human you control. Whenever another human enters the battlefield under your control, you'll put a 1/1 counter on Thalia's Lieutenant. That ability looks familiar somewhere. I think I might have seen it. But it's very similar to Kyler in the way it wants to operate and spread the love as well.
No.
It's great. The next one, kind of, if we just follow the list down, is we have the Absinthe Falconeer. So it's got an ability, Outlast, where you can pay 1, tap it, put a 1/1 counter on this creature as a sorcery. But what it says is each creature you control with a 1/1 counter on it, which, in theory, if you're playing Kyler or other abilities like that that spread the 1/1 counters out, your entire army will have it. It grants you flying. So, a form of evasion.
No!
Because angry humans should not be blocked, right? Is that what I'm hearing? Moving along to our next card, it's a tried and true, especially when it was in Standard. I know modern players still see this card from time to time. That's Champion of the Parish. 1 mana, 1/1 human soldier. Whenever another human enters the battlefield under your control, put a 1/1 counter on it. Simple, basic, but he is a 1 mana threat that can, over the course of a game, become very, very big, very, very scary, very, very quickly.
I have the new one for black.
For zombies, the Champion of the Parish.
Yeah.
That's the card it was a throwback to. They wanted to throw an homage back to the original Innistrad, and so rather than this one, which its flavor text is, I stand for every cobbler, tanner, and fool in this town, and they stand for me. The other one is, I go find them and turn them into zombies, basically. So, I love that they gave the homage for the zombies, but at the same time, we can't forget how valuable he is to his community.
Oh yeah, I like this one.
Yeah, and then the next one we have here is Victory's Envoy, 5 mana 3/3 human cleric. At the beginning of your upkeep, put a 1/1 counter on each other creature you control. For the sake of existing, you get a 1/1 counter every turn. So you can see how that can get out of hand with this little group of cards here.
Guys, we're going to have to battle decks. We're going to have to play a game once with this deck just to see some of the shenanigans go off.
Next, we have Juniper Order Ranger. Human Knight, 2/4 for 5 mana. Whenever another creature enters the battlefield under your control, put a 1/1 counter on that creature and a 1/1 counter on Juniper Order Ranger. Basically, whenever another creature enters the battlefield, it gets a 1/1 counter upon immediately entering play. And Juniper Order Ranger is going to give 1/1 counter to itself as well. So, that also plays nicely with the 1/1 counter theme and spreads it out. Then we move on to Custodi's Soulbinders. My apologies. It enters the battlefield with X 1/1 counters, where X is the number of creatures on the battlefield. So we got 12 creatures on the battlefield. It comes in as a 12/12. However, for 3 mana, we can remove a 1/1 counter and create a 1/1 spirit with flying. Basically, it's a human that's really easy to get counters onto, and if something happens or about to kill spell it, you can pump a bunch of mana into it to remove a couple of the counters and get some extra guys for defense. So, it's a pretty nice card. It's not the biggest wow factor, but it's a card that's on theme and does what we want to do. I can't complain too much about it being here. The next card is one of my pet cards, one of my favorite cards, Champion of Lampole. It's a 3-mana 1/1. Creatures with power less than Champion of Lampole's power can't block creatures you control. So, okay, normally that looks pretty unassuming, but it's the other rule on top of that makes it pretty good. Whenever another creature enters the battlefield under your control, put a 1/1 counter on Champion of Lampole. As you put 5, 10, 15, 20 creatures into play, this creature gets progressively bigger, which makes it harder and harder to block. When you get something that's just going to put other 1/1 counters on it, it can easily go from 1/1 at the start of the turn, play a human, other abilities going off, and it becomes a 7/7 in the blink of an eye, and now all your humans are able to attack through without being blocked. So it's a pretty good way to make your army scary out of nowhere.
So turn 1, turn 2, turn 3.
You could, in theory, curve out like that, yeah. I'm not sure that the state of the game would want you to do that, but it's certainly something you can do. And the deck is kind of meant to be able to be played as rather aggressively, while still maintaining some grindy in-game value and trying to attrition out people. Speaking of attrition, we have Micaias the Lunarch. Enters the battlefield with X 1/1 counters on it for an X and a white, 0/0. However, you can tap it and put a 1/1 counter on Micaias, or you can tap and remove a 1/1 counter and put a 1/1 counter on each creature you control. Like Kyler over there, who can then buff his buddy over here so he stays alive. So there are some additional synergies here that play around, but he's a pretty good army-wide buff, especially with his ability to just go, I'm going to take one for the team, pass it along, and then use another card to give him that 1/1 counter right back. So
Value.
yeah, it's pretty nice.
Gotta have the value.
Our next card here is going to be the Orzhov Advocist. Beginning of your upkeep, each player may put 2 1/1 counters on a creature they control. Here's a hint. You're going to probably put it on something that gives you some good synergy on your end. If a player does, creatures that player controlled can't attack you or a planeswalker you control until your next turn. So if your opponents want to do that, that's great. They won't be attacking you. However, there's no downside to you to do it. So you might as well just put the counters on your best available cards. Then we get to our last one that cares mostly about the 1/1 counters, and that's going to be our Elite Scale Guard up here. 2/3 human soldier. When it enters the battlefield, bolster 2, which is when it enters, you get to choose a creature with the lowest toughness among creatures you control, and you can put 2 1/1 counters on it. So that's a free setup to start putting the 1/1 counters out. And it says whenever a creature you control with a 1/1 counter on it attacks, tap target creature defending player controls. Much like this is going to make it to where our guys can't be blocked, that's going to make it so things cannot block us. Especially with us spreading out the 1/1 counters along all our creatures or all our humans. It's spreading the love. And so when we have 12 guys attacking that will tap down things, you know, that's 12 less blockers before we even start getting into, okay, now what are you going to choose to block with? Or how are you going to take the damage? And so it can mean that combat math can change really quickly.
How do you... Never mind. Go with your last card there.
And so with that, we're going to cut over to our last section of humans, and then we'll start going into the other pieces, how the deck functions.
Too much shenanigans.
Never too much.
Alright guys, so more humans.
Yeah, basically when I said the deck was humans, yeah, remember, the zombies are at the gates, the vampires have been feeding on them, the werewolves are trying to just, you know, hunt down anyone who leaves town, and You know, it's just not the best time for them. So
Hey, don't pick on the zombies. It's not their fault.
No, the humans kind of did it to themselves with that, with the Stitchers and the Ghoul Callers. But so we're in our final category, which are just the miscellaneous cards. They either don't fit the 1/1 counter theme, or they're not as much of a value piece in the deck, where they're not going to gain you more long-term value.
But they are humans, so they do counter. They do work with other cards.
Yeah, so they still follow the human synergies, and we'll kind of cover what they do individually as we hit them, because they all have different roles that support the deck, so they're here for a reason. And what we'll do is we'll kind of work from our right side here, down and around. Starting with Riders of Gavin. When it enters the battlefield, choose a creature type. So you'll pick probably the most predominant type on the board, or whatever has tokens that can block you. Human creatures you control have protection from creatures of that type. So basically, can't be targeted, can't be blocked, can't be dealt damage by. You're going to prevent a lot of things with that Riders of Gavin. It's a protection spell, basically.
Oh, that sucks. For my zombie deck.
Yeah, so if you're playing tribal, like zombies, rats, things like that, they're not going to be able to block you. So it makes them have to diversify. Or they have to figure out a more creative way to get rid of it. They can't just rely on a zombie to do it. They have to actually try to get a kill spell or things like that.
I did put some in my zombie deck.
Yeah. Moving to our next card here, kind of following the line down, we have the Heron's Grace Champion. It is a human knight for 4 mana, 3/3, with flash and lifelink. When it enters the battlefield, other humans you control get +1/+1 and gain lifelink until end of turn. Basically, it's a surprise buff to your entire team, and if you're going all out in like an Alpha Strike, knowing that, hey, even if I Alpha Strike out and they're only going to kill me by 1 or 2 points, that can change the math and go, okay, you've only got me by 1 or 2 points, but at the same time I can play this card and I can gain 16, 17 life and I stay in this game. So it's a nice way to kind of turn the tides or Alpha Strike out and go, my defenses are down, but let me give me a little bit more cushion. Next on our list here, though, we have the Stalwart Pathlighter. It's a 3/1 human soldier with vigilance. At the beginning of your combat on your turn, if you control a coven, creatures you control gain indestructible until the end of turn. Again, it's another protection effect. Ultimately, the humans are going to be really defensive and kind of, we're going to protect our own, we're going to kind of stay behind our walls, but when we come out, we're going to come out in force and we're going to make it known that, hey, we're here and we're here to party. Our next spell here is going to be Frontline Medic. It's a 3 mana 3/3 with Battalion. So Battalion's a mechanic we haven't spoke about yet, but it operates on our roll of 3s. Whenever it and at least 2 other creatures attack for a total of 3, creatures you control are indestructible until this turn. However, you can also sacrifice a Frontline Medic and counter target spell with X in its mana cost unless its controller pays 3 additional mana. So if you're worried about somebody going out with a fireball and just trying to burn out the table, that's going to tell us, yeah, no you're not. I'm going to counter that spell. Do you have 3 mana left? No, sorry. So it's another one of those on the board combat tricks that can really get somebody out of nowhere if they're not expecting it, or it can make them wary about using those effects. Moving it along here to our next one, we have Dawnheart Mentor. It's a 0/4 for 3 mana. When it enters the battlefield, you create a 1/1 human creature token, and its coven ability is 5 and a green. Target creature you control gets +3/+3 and trample until end of turn. Now, on first glance, it's like, this doesn't really make sense. Why is it here? Well, it gives us 2 different powers for our coven, so it helps us hit the coven trigger pretty reliably, or much more quickly. And over the course of the game, what it's going to be able to do is it's going to let this one big body thing get in for some extra trample damage that wouldn't normally be able to get there. So it's really there for its vigilance, or I'm sorry, not for its vigilance, for its trample, but it provides 2 bodies in order to be able to assist with the coven.
Nice.
Moving on to our next card, which is Dawnheart Wardens. It's a 3 mana 3/3 with Vigilance. Coven. Creatures you control get +1/+0 until end of turn. The whole point of that being there is it's another global buff. It's another anthem to make our guys be bulkier and beefier. We just want to make things hit hard.
For that one turn and then...
Yeah, but if you have that Coven trigger going off every turn, you're going to get the ability every turn. So, while it's only on your turn where it's checking this, it's going to be one of those, it makes your attack outs a lot more effective. So, it makes your opponent have to think math a little bit.
Math, bad, no.
Next,
Math, bad, no.
Yeah, and so it can put your opponents in precarious spots. Our next card, however, is going to be Kessick Cagebreakers. It's a 3/4 human rogue for 5 mana. When it attacks, you put a 2/2 green wolf token tapped and attacking into play for each creature card in your graveyard. So that board wipe just happened and Wrath killed 10 humans. You got 10 humans in the graveyard. Well, you can attack out with your Kessick Cagebreakers and get 10 2/2 wolves to kind of make up the difference. In this deck, it's not going to be as good as having those humans, but it's a little bit of ground get back up. So that way you don't just completely get blown out by a board wipe if your indestructible effects can't save you.
Ouch. It's kind of nasty.
Yeah, it can be a very swingy card that can help just out of nowhere take over a game. So, because they don't go away, meaning they either need to have another board wipe ready, or they need to have a way to favorably trade all those wolf tokens.
So, you attack one turn, you get, and we have the 10.
Yeah.
You get 10. You attack the next turn, you get 10 more.
Yes, because it's counting creatures in your graveyard.
So I have to exile your creatures, okay.
Yeah, you would have to exile the graveyard mostly. And, I don't run a lot of graveyard synergies in this deck because that's not what it's about. But at the same time, using it as a secondary resource, I'm always okay with that because realistically, even if you can't play out of that zone, you can use it as a resource to kind of help make your other cards better. Moving to our next in line here, we have Summerwald Beastmaster. It's a 1/1 human ranger for 7, so that rate's scary, but what it does for us is actually really, really big. When it enters the battlefield, it puts a 2/2 wolf, a 3/3 beast, and a 4/4 beast. It also means creature tokens we control have Death Touch. So, on its face, okay, it puts 3 bodies into play. Those are 3 bodies with all different powers. Technically 4 if we count the 1/1 itself, which means this is going to basically help us trigger Coven. Once we do that, oh hey, all those bodies we just put into play, 3 of them also have Death Touch, which is going to make them very scary to block with, to attack with. It means they have to think about things a lot more.
And that all the creature tokens you control have Death Touch. You got other things that makes tokens.
Yeah, I mean, like this enters play and makes a token. The Kessick Cagebreakers makes wolves. We've got Maya that makes the human tokens. So there are a couple of token synergies in here as well. They're not built in to be a token synergy, but they exist by nature of being in the deck.
But having just a little bit of it here or there, it helps.
It's a miscellaneous synergistic thing. It was never intended to be there because we cared more about it activating our Coven. But while we're at it, if it's going to give us another bonus, why wouldn't we? So that's what it's in here.
Value.
Exactly, and it's a human. That's the other thing. We're going to see later we have other cards that do similar things, but they don't fall into the human category. So,
boo.
Our next card is going to be Sicardan Zealot. It's a 3/3 human cleric for 5. Beginning of combat on your turn, choose any number of creatures with different powers. Each of them gets +X and gains vigilance until end of turn, where X is the vigilance or is the zealot's power. So, as it stands, it's a default 3/3. And at minimum, he can give himself a bonus. However, if you have a 1 power guy, a 2 power guy, a 3 power guy, and a 4 power guy, he can give 4 of them bonuses. So it allows you to kind of disperse even more power amongst your creatures. That kind of being the name of the game is we're trying to mitigate a 1/1's power by itself by making the 1/1 more powerful than it should be. Effectively operating as like the field general who is making all of his guys better by just being around.
Yeah, don't. Never mind.
Yeah, it's the whole idea is this deck is based around being a force multiplier. The next card we have here is going to be Bastion Protector. Commander creatures you control get +2/+2 and gain indestructible. It's a good way to protect our commander so we can keep the card draw online. And if we decided to swap the commander, the protection is still important. Having access to your commander at all times is great, but you don't want it to get costed out of the game with the commander attacks. That does add up eventually, and so realistically having the ability to keep that train going is pretty important.
Yeah, it really does.
Then our last human in the deck is going to be Odrick, Master Tactician, which I love that they had him in the deck already, especially with it being the Innistrad human deck. I'm glad they gave us one of the Innistrad legends to kind of play around with here. He is a 3/4 for 4 mana legendary creature human soldier with first strike. Whenever Odrick and at least 3 other creatures attack, you choose which creatures block this combat and how they block. So it allows you to set up all the favorable combat actions. When we're already attacking with huge big things, or if we're attacking with death touchy tokens or things of the like, it allows us to strategically trade or figure out how we're going to just pick off opposing creatures with lore effects. So overall, it kind of helps us change the combat math in our favor.
It looks like he has a lightsaber.
He very much does. He also kind of looks like Count Dooku.
Yes.
And you'll never unsee that.
Yes.
So.
I also almost see the ultramarine symbol.
Mm-hmm. It's very similar.
Sorry, guys. I will put up a picture right down here. The picture is it's an awesome picture.
Yeah, and with this, let's kind of flip over to the next section of cards. These are going to be some of the other cards that help the deck function, as well as kind of fill in the gaps that the humans can't all fill in themselves.
Wait, humans can't do stuff?
Sometimes there are roles for other jobs.
We're done with humans.
Yeah, we're past the humans. Now we're at the other cards to round out the list. And this is before we start getting to our land selections and a few other miscellaneous. But what we're going to do is we'll kind of go through them category by category, and we'll go from there. So what we want to do, let's start off with this section in the top right. And that's going to be the 4 cards in our corner. Starting off, we've got Bestial Menace. It's 5 mana, sorcery. Make a 1/1 snake, a 2/2 green wolf, and a 3/3 green elephant. Notice we're all looking at different powers. That's going to be for our coven mechanic. Basically, it's a 5 mana to try to help us get there. And if we've got our commander in play, that's going to be our instant coven. Very much the same thing here with the Tristani Summoner next to it. It's going to be another 7 mana, 1/1, that puts a 2/2, a 3/3, and a 4/4 into play. In this case, it's a 2/2 Knight with Vigilance, 3/3 Centaur, and a 4/4 Rhino with Trample. So, again, more kind of things there. We have Celestial Judgment, which is going to be right here. It's a 6 mana cost sorcery. For each different power among creatures on the battlefield, choose a creature with that power, destroy each creature not chosen that way. It's a selective board wipe based on power, and you get to be the determining factor. Do you want to gain some political favor with somebody? Okay, their creature of power 3 gets to be the one that survives. Otherwise, you can just go, I'm going to keep my 1, my 2, my 3, my 4, and my 0 safe. Everything else goes away. Buy everyone else's board. So, it's a good way to selectively be able to save things on the board. And it means you can get some favor at the table if you need it. And then our last card that kind of cares about the various powers or the covens is going to be Sigarda's Vanguard. It's a 5 mana, 3/3 flash flyer. When it enters the battlefield or attacks, choose any number of creatures with different powers. much like we would with the Celestial Judgment. Those creatures gain double strike until the end of the turn. Now, it doesn't say your creatures, so if you flash it in during somebody else's combat, you get to make combats a lot more interesting. For example, you can determine that, hey, that commander that's swinging in, that would not have died because it's got a big power and toughness. Oh, hey, now that the defender now has double strike, he's going to die. So it's got some political implications. It's got some very tricky combat implications for the board, and it makes things have to be thought about a little bit more. So that's kind of why we've got that there. Our next card is going to be off to its left, the Antioch Bondkin. It's a 2-mana, 2/1 dog soldier.
Ben's best friend.
With Outlast, much like we had on one of our other, on the Falconeer. This one says, each creature you control with a 1/1 counter on it has first strike. Basically, if it's got 1/1 counters, it's again another unfavorable combat matchup. It's all about creating mismatches, making it hard to combat them and deal with. So, we've got that working for us there. And it's on a 2/1 body. So again, it's on a 2 power, so we can kind of play our creatures accordingly to try to get that coven trigger off. We've got tried and true Swiftfoot boots down here.
Yeah.
We want to protect our commander. We want to make it untargetable. That's our way to do that. Our next spell is going to be Unbreakable Formation. 3 mana cost instant. Creatures you control gain indestructible until end of turn. That board wipe going off, we're going to stick around. We're a go wide deck. We want to make sure we have plenty of protection built in for our strategy going wide, so we don't just get blown out.
So they have board wipe, you have board protection?
Yes. And like I said, we do run our own board wipe in case things go wrong, but for the most part, we're we're the aggressor. We don't want to be reacting. We want to be aggressive all the way and put somebody on the back foot. However, it does have an addendum to it. I catch the joke. It's its other ability. If you cast this during your main phase, meaning on your turn, pre or post combat mains, you get to put a 1/1 counter on each of your creatures, and they gain vigilance until the end of the turn as well. So it plays into one of our other synergies as well with the 1/1 counters. So it's a little bit of a double whammy. It does board protection, and it gives us more powerful guys. Kind of moving along to our next card here, we've got the brand new Sigarda, Champion of Light. She's 4/4 Angel for 4. Flying Trample. Humans get +1/+1. So she's going to ramp up all the humans in the deck already. And in case you haven't been able to tell, we run a lot of humans. But her Coven ability, when she attacks, if you've got Coven, look at the top 5 cards of your library. You may reveal a human creature card from among them and put it into your hand. The rest go on the bottom in any order. Or, I'm sorry, in a random order. My apologies. Does sometimes make a difference.
Yes.
However, it's another way we can get some additional value out of our creatures in the deck, out of the humans in the deck, and out of our Coven ability. So, just a little bit more value, and that's always useful. Moving right along to our next card. Oh hey, Sigarda's right back here with Sigarda Heron's Grace. She is a 4/5 flyer with hexproof, with flying. However, she does give you and humans you control hexproof. So your humans will be hard to target by opponents' abilities and spells. She can also pay 2 mana and exile a card from your graveyard. Doesn't have to be a creature, just any card. And create a 1/1 white human soldier creature token. Oh hey, it's a soldier, it's a human, and it's another body. Moving along to our next card, we have the Herald of War. 5 mana, 3/3 flyer. When it attacks, you put a 1/1 counter on it. So it kind of plays into our 1/1 counter synergies, but that's not really why it's here. Angel and human spells you cast cost 1 less to cast for each 1/1 counter on Herald of War.
Damn.
So those 7 mana humans we were talking about earlier, that's going to help out a lot in making them much more affordable to put into play. And so realistically, you can pump out a lot more humans than you think in this deck. Moving it along to the next one, we have Angel's Glory Rise. And this is kind of one of the 2-card cycles in the pre-con. I like that they put in the pre-cons. I like that they exist because they do have a purpose even when those cards are not, even when it's not a pre-con versus pre-con thing. But it can sometimes feel bad as a blowout. It's a 7 mana, 4/6 Angel of Flying. When it enters the battlefield, exile all zombies, then return all human creature cards from the graveyard to the battlefield. And the zombie deck will kind of showcase that card there, but know that they have a cycle that kind of hates on the other deck in this, so it's kind of like an ace gotcha card. So next we have Dearly Departed, 6 mana for a 5/5 flying spirit. As long as Dearly Departed is in your graveyard, which this is one of the few cards that care about our graveyard, each human creature you control enters the battlefield with an additional 1/1 counter on it. So it comes in with the battlefield with a 1/1 counter, and it helps us out getting those synergies to start setting up. Next, we're going to kind of get into our card advantage a little bit. These are just a couple of the cards. We've seen some of the humans that will do this as well to help out our value, but for the most part, that's what these are going to be about as well. Starting off, we've got the tried and true Shamanic Revelation. 5 mana, sorcery, draw a card for each creature you control, and you gain 4 life for each creature you control with power 4 or greater. So if those 1/1 counters have been piling up and you've got a bunch of powerful creatures, that's going to net you some life on top of the card draw. The next kind of spell we have, and it's kind of a ramp spell as well, but I count it more as draw power, is going to be the Great Hinge. And I know this card is still pretty pricey right now, but we're kind of at its low point. It's cycled out of standard, and it's going to be a staple in Commander going forward. This is the time to pick it up if you can. It is a 9 mana legendary artifact, but it costs X less, where X is the greatest power among creatures you control. Never less than 2 green, though. However, it'll tap and add a green, you'll gain 2 life. So it's a mana rock for green. They don't really need that. So what makes this special? Well, whenever a non-token creature enters the battlefield under your control, you get to put a 1/1 counter on it, which in this deck helps out with the synergy, as well as you get to draw a card. And the draw card is why it's really here, but it also synergizes with our 1/1 counters, so it felt like it was too on the nose not to go with it.
Gain life. So we hate the ability to gain life.
Normally, I am not the biggest proponent of gaining life, but I'm also not the biggest proponent of 1/1 counters. I think they clog up the board state.
True.
So this deck is kind of a little bit not me, but at the same time, it's very me in some of the ways. So
yes.
Next, we've got Lifecrafters Beastier. So at the beginning of your upkeep, scry 1. So it's kind of like I consider scry to be like a 1/3 card draw, maybe, because it's card selection. It's not really true card draw, but it'll help you filter out to get to the cards you need to actually play the game. The reason it's in here and it's counted as card advantage, though, is its other ability. Whenever you cast a creature, you may pay a green. If you do, draw a card. Now, if you've been doing this right, it'll also be, okay, upkeep. Now we get to pick what's there, we'll draw, and then it gives you more draw throughout the turn. Then we have Wall of Mourning. 2 mana cost, Defender, 0/4. And this is Wizards playing around with how can white get card advantage or card draw without actually getting card draw. And they came up with this one. And I actually kind of enjoy it. It's based on opponents. What it says is, when it enters the battlefield, exile a card from the top of your library for each opponent you have. So if I got 3 opponents, it's 3 cards. Coven, at the beginning of my end step, I can then put a card exiled with it into my hand. So if I've got a Coven trigger, which that's what the deck's about, so we kind of want to do it, I can get one of those resources. So it's a kind of a slow burn draw spell. And so with that, that's kind of filling out this part, but we do have a few more categories I want to hit. Mostly it's going to be our other removal spells at our other ramp options before we get into the land base. So if you'll stick with us for just a moment, we'll be right back. And we're in the closing sections here. We're going to kind of hit our mana ramp first before we touch on our removal. So we kind of have some tried and true commander staples here in the form of Soul Ring and Arcane Signet.
No. You got, like Pot of Greed and Yu-Gi-Oh! You have to go through what they do.
No.
I'm sorry. Like I said, bad dad jokes.
That said, the other cards we've added was a very good reprint in the form of Talisman of Unity, the green-white talisman. Meaning there's one less of them that needs to be reprinted. And then we've got Celebrate the Harvest, which for 4 mana, search your library for up to X basic lands where X is the number of different powers among creatures you control. Put those onto the battlefield tapped. So if they were going to give us a rampant growth that scaled up in this deck, this is probably the best way they could have done that, by making it based on the number of powers you control in the Coven deck. Kind of moving along, though.
So wait. This puts them into the field, not in your hand.
Yeah, onto the battlefield tapped. So I've got 5 different powers, it's going to go find me 5 basics.
No.
But the problem is it's already 4 to cast, so it's going to be later on in the game, and it does depend on you having creatures.
Right.
So, if you've only got 1 creature, you can get blown out by a kill spell. It's just, at this time, it's one of those, we want to make sure that we've gotten something on theme, and this is a pretty on theme ramp spell.
Oh, yeah.
Since our creatures are already going to be able to tap for mana through various different means, whether that's the actual legendary in this deck that'll give us that, or it's an Absinthe Pilgrim, or the Summerwald Sage. We've got a couple of ways to do it, so we didn't feel like we needed to go that heavy on the mana rocks. But we did want to make sure we did include some ramp here as well. And last but not least, we're going to come to our removal. And again, kind of like we mentioned before, we did run a lot of removal in the form of our humans. We're mostly a proactive game plan, so we don't really need to be overwhelming ourselves with these. We're not reacting to the board state or our opponent's actions. We want to put them on the back pedal so they don't have time to get their plan off. So if we come out of the gates aggressive and swinging, the plan is they're not going to be able to set up. So we don't need the removal. We need to be the aggressors. That said, sometimes the plan doesn't always come into play, and so we need to have a couple of ace in the holes. That's what this is. So, starting off, we've got Tried and True, Return to Dust, another commander staple, though it is starting to fall out of favor with some people. I think it's one of those cards we should always kind of still keep in mind when deck building, because it can be a 2-for-1. 4 mana, instant, exile, artifact, or enchantment, notably exile. If you cast this during your main phase, you may exile up to 1 other artifact or enchantment. So it could potentially get 2 things instead of 1, and we're still exiling it. So no more recursion. You're not getting it back from the graveyard. We don't want to see it. Along those same vein, we've got Swords to Plowshares, another good staple removal piece. Exile target creature. Its controller gains life equal to its power. Yeah, them gaining life is inconvenient. We're in a 40 life format. Life totals are already high. Giving them 3 mana for their dude that's going to be a massive problem down the road. That's a small trade we're willing to make.
It's the lesser of 2 evils.
Pretty much. And so kind of along those same lines, lesser of 2 evils. Let's kind of move on to our next one. That's going to be Ruinous Intrusion. Again, it's another exile ability here in our removal suite. Notice I tend to prefer a lot of exile effects because I run into a lot of recursion. If it goes to the yard, they can probably get it back.
Yeah.
It's going to exile target artifact or enchantment. Then it's going to put X 1/1 counters on target creature you control, where X is the mana value of the permanent exiled by this card. So we get rid of the Great Hinge. That's 9 mana value. Go put 9/1/1 counters on something. Have fun with that. So
Jeez.
even in an offensive capability. Oh, hey, we've used our Great Hinge for what it's worth. Let me go ahead and get 9 counters on Kyler for the Alpha Strike. Now all my creatures get +9/+9. Get you. And you can do that at instant speed, including using the mana from the Great Hinge to do it. So, synergies.
No. Your decks are so mean.
So it's not even that they're mean as much as we build purpose-built. We kind of do things with other things in mind. But we also try to play our pet cards. We like that. Kind of going back to our exile, we have a card that does a little bit of that, but for the most part is more traditional removal in the form of Return to Nature. 2 mana, instant, choose one. Destroy an artifact, destroy an enchantment, or exile a card from the graveyard. So, you know, if you didn't have the right removal at the right time, or a card just happened to die instead of getting exiled like you wanted, you could exile it from the graveyard. Is your opponent about to go off with a combo piece that's an artifact or enchantment, you can just remove it and slow them down. So, in that case, we've got a couple of options there as well. And our last piece of removal, again, another tried true staple. And Wizards did a really good job with this deck. They put a lot of good staples in here, even if they're not high value staples. And that's Beast Within. Destroy target permanent. That includes land, that includes creatures, whatever you need to get rid of. In return, they get to have a 3/3 beastie. For the most part, it's fine to pay the 3 mana to do that if the beast is less threatening than the card you get rid of. Whether that be a land that's causing you a lot of grief, if it's, a creature that's, 7 mana, 6/6 beastie with a bunch of other abilities. As long as you're getting the extra value out of it, it's fine. Now, the last little bit we're going to touch on is going to be our lands, because you can't have a deck without that. And then we'll go from there. So let's pause the video and we'll be right back. Okay, and now we're back. So in this case, I'm going to kind of hit our basics first, just to kind of make sure we get those out of the way. Because really, the meat and the potatoes of the land base is going to be some of our special fancy things. We're running 8 mountains, forest. This is not a red deck.
Yes, this is red now, guys.
It's been a day. So it's 8 forest and 12 plains. Green is the splash color in this deck, but it is still kind of important to make sure we're able to hit that. So between the density of the basics that we'll be able to go find, or that we have already got here, and our dual casting ability from the lands, we should be more than fine and be able to get our colors. Like I said, we're running 12 plains, but we're also running a Windbrisk Heights, which is the hideaway land that cares about number of creatures attacking. It wants 3 or more. But if we can hit that ability, we can pay a white mana, tap it, and get an extra card. So that's always fun. Ultimately, we've got the Command Tower, Path of Ancestry, because this is a tribal deck, and why wouldn't we have it? We got Overgrown Farmland, because this is from the Midnight Hunt actual set. I felt it would be nice to go ahead and include the brand new Innistrad Midnight Hunt land in here. Because we're playing around with some synergies with the plains and all of that with our Knight of the White Orchid, I went ahead and we kind of added a little bit of an upgrade to the land base in the form of Scattered Groves, Temple Garden, Canopy Vista, which Canopy Vista was already in here, but we also added a Windswept Heath. I know it's a fetch land. I know fetch lands are generally pretty expensive, but I was able to pick this one up pretty cheaply, and realistically, I do think that they are a good upgrade if you can get your hands on them. They're by no means required, and there is a budget option in the form of Grasslands, the slow fetch. Then we have Temple of Plenty, which was in the pre-con, Fortified Village, which was in the pre-con, Sungrass Prairie in the pre-con, Selesnya Sanctuary in the pre-con, and Corrosion Verge. So all of those were pre-con available cards that help us with the mana. Again, I just made some minor tweaks, and this is going to put us at 37 lands overall, by the way, for anyone who does care about my land base. We also have a Blighted Woodlands to help us go find 2 basics. Rogue's Passage, in case something gets big enough to where we can just alpha strike with 1 creature. We don't want that creature getting blocked. That's our way to do that. Underdark Rift, which is another removal spell in our land base. So it's a hidden removal spell that can be an onboard combat trick. Basically, for 5 mana, tap, exile it, roll a d10. Put target artifact, creature, or planeswalker into its owner's library beneath the top X cards, where X is the number you rolled on the d10. Activate only as a sorcery. So, in a pinch, it's a removal spell in our land base that we can use to get rid of something, and it didn't really cost us a slot in the main deck. But since hopefully we're ramping and our other abilities get us that, if we've got the extra mana sitting around, it can help us. The last card, though, kind of synergizes well with the 1/1 theme in the deck. And that's our Gavin Township. Tap, add a colorless mana. However, for 2, a white, and a green, tap, put a 1/1 counter on each creature you control. Now, I remember back in the day, around when original Innistrad came out, at that time when I was playing Standard, I had a couple of friends of mine who were also playing. One of the big things I would see was the combo of Machias, Gavin Township. So you remove a counter from Machias, put a 1/1 counter on everything, and Gavin Township put the counter right back onto Machias. And so basically giving everything like +2/+2 except Machias, and Machias was set up for the next turn to keep that train going.
Jeez.
So, I figured that was only appropriate to fit in here, considering Gavin Township is one of the villages or lands there on Innistrad where the humans would kind of gather. So I felt it was appropriate to have it here. And so at this point, that's going to be our deck. Tell us what you think. Is there any cards you would add, take away? I know I've got my opinions on it. I know a lot of people like 1/1 counters as a theme. Should I have gone heavier into that? Did I do the right thing by going into humans? What do y'all think? Let us know.
I like the deck, to be honest, guys. I'm actually a 1/1 counter player. I like doing the 1/1 counter stuff. It does get a little bit complicated with the math sometimes and remembering what triggers. I'm looking forward to playing against this deck.
Yeah, and kind of like we were mentioning, I generally will use tokens as more of a strategy. So because of that, I use the tokens a lot of the time, but I use dice to represent them just because I can't always get the tokens I need. So that, with me, that's a representation issue where it's hard to get both to work properly, and that's why I generally tend to lean more toward my actual tokens versus 1/1 counters. But, I know a lot of people like both. Tell me which one is the right team. Which team are you on? Team counters or team tokens? Obviously, I'm team tokens, and it sounds like you're team counters. So,
yeah.
Let us know below, and maybe, just maybe, depending on what people say, we can actually get a video out where it's me building a token, or me playing tokens versus you playing 1/1 counters, and see how that goes. Maybe that's a thing we can do.
Yeah. Like I said, I like the deck. I want to play against it. Just know a lot of humans are going to die.
In theory. Or maybe they'll just stand in formation and protect themselves.
Alright, guys. As always, stay forever noob. Stay safe, and we'll catch you next time. Peace.
Take care.